right, Allie, we are on
Hey,
part
we're
2 of
on.
Brandon. Y'all did a great job yesterday.
We
That
did
was
too.
really,
Team
really
effort.
good. And it's fun watching you lead this and listen to him share his story. I'm going to do a quick intro
Yeah.
with one of our new services, and then I'm going to let you take the lead on this after this.
Okay.
Are you in need of a trusted therapist or provider near your home? All the internet sites and directories can be overwhelming. To help, Allie and I have created an exclusive list of providers in your area that we believe in and trust.
While the therapeutic relationship is unique to each individual and the final decision is always up to you, we hope that our trusted listing service can be a good starting point. Visit healingcenter.co to find a trusted therapist near you. All right, we on?
We are on, Allie. I'm going to let you lead.
Okay. Hey again.
Hey guys, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for
Good.
coming back, Brandon.
Well, I appreciate it. I enjoyed our time yesterday.
Gosh, it was so
So
good. I was exhausted after. I know you were.
you were, heck yeah. I slept well last night, so that's always good.
Good.
Well, good. Sometimes you
Good.
don't after stuff like that. So I'm glad you
Yeah.
did.
Well,
Well, for people who might just be tuning into this one and
Sure.
they're trying to kind of catch up, we spoke yesterday with Brandon Hatmaker, and some history on him prior to yesterday is we really talked a lot about how him and his wife at the time were fairly well-known Christian leaders and authors who had co-hosted multiple TV shows on HGTV and led the Legacy Collective together. Their divorce was in the public light because of their social media platform. And this podcast today is really the first time he shared his journey from his perspective and experience throughout that trauma. And today we really get to sit and talk more about what life has been like after the trauma. So hopefully a little bit less heavy today for you.
yeah, maybe
But
so. Ali, I like how you introduced that, just the idea of it not just being my story, but my experience, because I think different people can live through a very similar story, but they experience it differently. And so I like how you said that. Thank you.
yeah, and I know a few, like I guess a month ago or so, we had my husband and his ex-wife on here and we all talked together. And I think it was one of the best experiences I've had of realizing how true everybody's experience was and how different they all were. You know, I
Right.
think I'd always heard about the value of everybody's own story, but then to sit there together and to talk about the exact same timelines and my perspective from a 21-year-old, hers as a mom of 2 young kids, you know, divorcing, it was so interesting. So I do think like your experience is no less valid than ones that maybe people have already heard. It's just a really
No,
different version
right.
of it.
Well, it's your truth,
That's right.
you know.
Yeah, and it did happen the way
Yeah,
that you said, you know, it's everybody's experience is really
right.
different.
That's good.
So
Thank you for that.
yeah, anyway, leading more into today, I did want to follow up on some things yesterday. I feel like I was so zoned in on our conversation. There were several times I kind of forgot we were leading a podcast. So I do want to make some clear points for the audience
Sure.
before we move forward. So I know one thing that we talked about was a lot of the kind of spiral that you experienced after the trauma of Scott's death and all that led to. And I think it's important to clarify. My understanding is that you weren't in church leadership at the time
Right.
that spiral was really taking on.
Yeah, I think towards the beginning, as we began to kind of lead in when we were in filming for HGTV and starting to write and travel more, things like that. I had actually stepped down because I was the original church planner that actually led the church we were in, and I stepped into more of a elder role and taught quite frequently. But it was a very significant time because a lot of that trauma, those experiences we were going through, we were processing and being able to really, I was able to speak through that. But there came a point where it began to affect me in certain ways where I sat there and I could not find myself in that position where I could stand on stage and teach or lead other people. For a couple of reasons. Initially, it was when I was really struggling with not the truth of it, but just how it all worked out. When you go, wow, I used to feel like I can teach this with knowing the confidence, hey, you're going to be all right. And I found myself in that place where I was like, I don't know that I'm going to be all right. And that's a time when I just kind of step back for a season. And I think as I continued to just kind of hide the things I was going through and leaving those things undealt with, and that spiral became to get worse. My lifestyle and the things I started doing that I'm proud. I was not proud of by any means. I could never take a stage and teach or be in that kind of environment, at that time. And so that was also very interesting, is because you're going through all this and you withdraw and you pull out even more from the environment that you've seen before, and you isolate yourself even more. Hopefully there's some sense of integrity in the fact that I would not, remain in leadership during those times. But also, it's also disorienting that you continue to find yourself withdrawn from everything that you've always known is very stable, But I do think, I think it's important when you're in the public light, people make a lot of assumptions. They make a lot of assumptions that, well, just because they didn't know you were in counseling for 3 years, that they assume you never went to counseling, or they assume because maybe you were in leadership of a certain nonprofit or a faith-based thing, that when you went through a struggle that you were doing that while still claiming you weren't, going through a struggle. And one of the things I'm grateful is that I believe I always handled that with integrity, and that when I knew I was at a certain place, I wasn't going to represent that I was. And that's where I think a lot of people knew that I was struggling, those who were close to me, that things were changing, that I was removing myself, that I was withdrawing from those things. And so those are indicators, I think, that things are going wrong. And people want to just give you your space in that time. And it needed to happen. But that's important for me. Thank you for bringing that up. It's very important for me to, just because it is in the public light, and because these things continue to be revisited from people who do know me and have cared about me in the past or known my story, that I look back on so much and I'm super proud. And I think one of the mistakes we make is that when we mess up, we think that discredits everything that was really good and pure. And there was some really good and really pure things going on for a very long time. And so sad how they came to a close and how they ended. But then that just gives you an opportunity maybe to rise again, right? And do some good.
Sure.
Yeah, such a beautiful picture. I mean, your life is such a beautiful picture of just the human journey, that there hasn't been this resistance or this hiding of the hard, but, really, you are in alignment with the hard. You are not trying to shove it away in a closet.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, our platform before was always to try to be vulnerable and honest, and really look at things from a hard angle and just ask those tough questions. And so we always did that. And I feel like I always did that. And then when it got personal, I think I just kind of went quiet when I didn't know how to deal with it. And then while you're still in recovery, and I believe I'm still in recovery from, and I think we constantly are, that you can still speak from that place of honesty when it seems appropriate or when it's right. But the key is, I think, is to never feel like, and I think if you ever find yourself where you feel like you've arrived or that you absolutely know all the answers now, then you probably just don't. And so I think it's always a good way to speak from, hey, instead of, hey, you need to do this, it needs to be, we need to do this, or we need to be thinking about this, or what I'm going through are these things. And I don't speak as an expert. All I can do is share my experiences and what I've learned and what were incredibly surprising and helpful for me as I went through those things.
Gosh, that's so good. It makes me, I know this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it makes me think about when my husband and I were dating, we had a really traumatic experience with the church here locally while we were dating. And he grew up Baptist, so he felt like we got to go back to church. And I was very like, I just don't want to go to church anymore. And so we met with a couple that I just have always really looked up to and trusted. And he's always been a pastor, and had dinner with them and said, we just want to find a church, and y'all are the only people that I've ever known to be in a ministry position that hasn't fled at some point because of something in your personal life was exposed. And they brought us to this amazing Anglican church that we're still at 12 years later. But the pastor of that church, our pastor, he tragically died last summer. But before he did, he had Yeah, thank you. It's still hard. He had a traumatic choice that he made while he was still pastoring, and he got up and told the whole church about it, put it in a binder, and said anybody can come by the office and read all about it. Took sabbatical for 30 days and came back and was still our pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that and what you're saying as well. And I think it takes so much courage to have integrity when life hits you in the way that it hit him and hit you as well when you're in that leadership position, because again, so much of your identity is tied to it and you feel so much responsibility for the people in your church. But yet I think when we don't, we know that the truth is always going to come out. And when it comes out the other way, it's so harmful to have a pastor. I had several pastors in leadership that had things like that happen and they just stepped away from the church, and I think to be able to stay after it came out, they did, but they were still playing that role during the time. And for you to have the integrity, I know that was really difficult to step away from it and say, like, I don't need to be in this position right now.
Well, thanks. You know what? The church conversation is really hard and everybody goes through different journeys with it. And, the church is just a bunch of individual people who are just trying to represent God the best they know how. That's hard to do. There's just no one that's ever going to be able to do that right or completely and also, we go through different life phases and life seasons in which we need something different out of our faith journey at that time. If you're a young parent, you may be at a church that has something that provides something for your children that later on you don't need, or your own spiritual growth, your own maturity changes over the years as you get older. And I'm more convinced now that the harder expectation on our church communities is for us to expect one church to be everything to all people their whole life. And I think instead, if the church could figure out what they do well and receive people for that season of their life and just be okay with blessing them and sending them to a different church in a different season or whatever it may be, I think things would get along a whole lot better. But I think the biggest thing is for us to back up and just remember that we elevate people. We put people on a pedestal when sometimes they were never asked to be there. We assume someone has everything together because maybe they're in charge of something. But unless they've told you, hey, I've got everything together, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just trying the best that they know how with what they've got. And so then when something goes a little sideways and they don't meet our expectations, then maybe we can understand that it wasn't something that they ever promised. I never wrote a book on marriage. There's a reason for that. It's because marriage is hard and I didn't feel like an expert by any means. And I won't probably ever write a book on mental health or anything like that. I'm not an expert on that, but I could just tell my story, and it's up to us, each one of us, when we feel the pressure to say, hey, I know exactly, look to me for this as an example. Wow, that's a pretty tall, order to live up to.
Yeah, that really is. Gosh, that's so good. We could do a whole nother podcast just on that, but I do want to be able to transition into your recovery. Sure. Two other things I wanted to just point out that I feel like I did not do a good job yesterday of acknowledging, and is that your oldest daughter and Jen, your first wife, they both made it really public when your daughter decided to come out. And I wonder if that is a part of your theological shift that you had for yourself and your own journey.
Oh, all right. Thank you for asking that. I think it's really, I have a couple of views on this conversation. The first one is that if you have never loved someone from the LGBTQ community and you find yourself in an argument about it, you are missing a very critical part of that conversation. And I mean, truly love, not just, I know I have a gay friend or this or that. I'm telling you, you're missing a true piece of information you need in order to have that conversation well. I believe that. But the other thing is I think a lot of people assume that our theology shifted because of my daughter. But the truth is it shifted before we knew that was something she was dealing with and coming into her own about. And for me as a dad, I'm very, very grateful that happened in that order. Because while I'm sad that, our young teenagers and our young men and women who are in the church and are struggling in a lot of fear and wondering how this is going to affect everything as they're trying to discover their own sexuality and understand where they are. It's a really daunting thing to have to go through by yourself and in privacy and in isolation. And so I know that I wish that, maybe we would have had a more public stance or throughout our life so she could have grown up in that kind of safety. But I'm very grateful that we were where we were when we knew that she was coming out as gay. And for me, that's her story. And I feel very uncomfortable talking about it very much, but it is important to me. And I'm grateful that that should be a part of the conversation. But I'm just really grateful that shift happened on our own journey in order to be able to support her.
Yeah. Be able to have that. I know there are a lot of timelines that you would change if you could, but I'm so thankful that's one that you wouldn't,
And I don't think it cheapens it in any way. If someone, was not there theologically and they had a loved one who came out and that they began to support them and it felt different and they shifted their theology, that doesn't mean that, it wasn't convenient for you. It's maybe they just felt it in a new way and saw the truth for what it really was for the first time. And so I'm grateful for our journey, how it went down. But I think in any order of that happens, I think is significant. Anytime we see someone or see something and the truth of it, when some kind of scales fall off our eyes is significant.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just one last thing, I think we're going to hear more about this later on, hopefully.
Okay.
I know this feels like a grilling. Sorry.
No.
I know that now you are engaged to someone who I kind of over. I think she's amazing. Haven't even met her, but I do. Wow. And I think it's important to name, especially for people who maybe are listening to this with holding the rest of your history and other parts of your family kind of in their circle, that your fiance now had nothing to do with your that you have talked about and didn't know each other at the time, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. No, Tina and I met afterwards and she wasn't involved. I talked to the last episode that I did have an affair that ended up leading was the final straw, I think, and leading to my divorce, but it wasn't Tina and definitely met her after that. And I think that's important because a lot of people want to spread rumors or say things, and out of being fair to her, I mean, she doesn't want to be known as that, and because what she brought to me was so good and so healthy and so helpful and so genuine and pure. And so I'm just super grateful for her in our journey. And so, thank you. I told you you can ask me anything and you can say whatever you need to, and I'll respond accordingly. And so thank you for saying that. That is an important piece of my storyline.
Absolutely. I mean,
I will tell you this, we met soon, we met quick, and it was a little disorienting because it was like, wow, is this too fast? And I think I kind of went public on that at one point, just saying, hey, I know this was fast, but we weren't looking. I wasn't dating. I wasn't looking for somebody. We just met and started talking and kept talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that is so hard too. We've talked some about how, one of the things that you've really struggled with since is this feeling of like you're still doing something wrong. I think when you meet someone that soon after, it can feel like, am I doing something wrong because I'm already so enamored? Is that with this person, is that something I should feel guilty about? And so I love that you, I know you're probably bent in doing that as protection of her, but I also love that you aren't letting that hold you captive there, because that is another thing that you've done wrong.
Yeah. I think the feeling of doing something wrong, I think part of that is just a remnant of of what I've gone through and what I've done. I think there's the trauma that we discussed, like childhood trauma, there's adult trauma that I experienced that led towards, but I brought into my own life, into my family's life, a new trauma from what I did. At my lowest moment, I brought real trauma into my family's life, into my ex, into my children's life, because I changed the path of our lives, right? It's also self-inflicted trauma. So I don't get, it's my fault. So I don't get to, I think sometimes we don't get to talk about it the same, but it's still very real. And so out of that carries still shame, and it carries, I could deal with these other things, but there's still a lot of shame and guilt and things like that. And so I think it's a weird thing that you still struggle with, not just in dating Tina or something like that, but you sometimes you hold on to for me, I hold on to this thing like I'm in trouble, like I'm done, like am I in trouble, like I feel in trouble a lot. And what I realize is I have to connect that back to the origination of that, which is part of this healing process. Understand, why do I feel the way I do right now? And okay, it's connected back to this thing, which is actually not related to what I'm doing, because there's nothing wrong with this, or there's nothing out of the ordinary of that. It's connecting it with some other trauma from my past that's making me have these emotions. So they're not bad, they're not wrong to have. It's just really important to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Gosh, you explained that so well, because I do think it can be, as we kind of talk more about your road to recovery, I think one of the things that's hardest about where you're living now is the time that it takes to put, that saying, stop, pause, take action, don't react.
Right.
It's like, that's such a hard thing when those neural pathways have been so hardwired to react, to act on emotion, to, have these core beliefs about yourself, all of those things. I think it takes a lot of patience to do the part of the journey that you're doing now of going, okay, wait, that's that emotion. I've got to pause here and remind myself of what that isn't connected to.
Right. Is that a practice too, that you have to keep going?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I interrupted you. Finish your statement.
No, that's exactly what it is. I think it's just hard.
Yeah. I think I've always thought of it before, and this is just anything in life. I think you have to first learn it. It's a process of learning something, and hearing something, and it's a cognitive thing. And then before you actually believe that it's true, before you can actually live it out, right? And so it's kind of like a head, heart, hand kind of thing. You hear it, you learn it. And I think in my journey, that's what it's been. Like, my very first thing that was so significant was hearing an actual diagnosis, which sounds weird, but actually going, yeah, I think that's the problem. Like, what's the actual problem? Like, I went into Milestone going, okay, do I have a gambling addiction? Am I an alcoholic? What are my problems? And so we were able to really work through those, the experts, and through different kinds of testing and things like that. And then when it comes back on a scale of 20, I scored 19 out of 20 on PTSD. You go, wow, no, like, that's really my issue. That's really what's going on. And so we can start in that place to kind of process it. So I had to accept that in my brain, first of all, and stop listening to everyone else's diagnosis of what was wrong with me. And then I could put everything else in the right category. Oh, no, that's an unhealthy coping mechanism. Oh, no, that's what this was. That's what this was. So I can address it in the right ways. And so I think starting there allows me now, when I have a feeling, and it is interesting how everything comes to a feeling. We need to stop and go, okay, I'm feeling this right now. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm frustrated. I feel entitled. I'm this, or to really go, why? Why do I feel this way, so that we can identify where it's coming from and be honest with ourselves, and we could tie it back to some trauma that we've had or some experience we've had, whether it's distrust or whether it's just straight up pain or whatever it may be. Those are things that I have to do regularly, especially in my relationships right now. And it's very, very helpful, because then I'm usually not frustrated with the person in front of me, because it's really not their fault that they did something normal that just reminded me of something that wasn't normal, and so that's part of the journey of that. And it wasn't automatic. I mean, going into Milestones and spending 31 days there, I came back still. I had it in my head and had no idea how to live it out. And then you come back and you live in the reality and the consequences of where you put yourself and how everyone else wants to treat you and talk to you. And you get to that place where you have to start with, I know I'm not a bad person. And that has to be your belief. You could forgive yourself and know you're better than that, right? But everyone else tells you you're not. That's what's hard about the public side of things. Everyone else tells you you're not. And you have to somehow get through all that other clutter, do the hard work, believe that you're better than your lowest moment, right? Understand why you feel the way you feel and actually apply it to your new conversations, your new goals in life, your new relationships. And it's just constant struggle. It's still a struggle. And then maybe it becomes a journey instead of a struggle, but it's still a struggle in many ways.
Gosh, as you said that, I kind of felt this like weight on me, just thinking about coming back from such intensive work. It's like yesterday's conversation was a sand grain of what you did in 31 days there. And I felt tired last night. It's like, okay, if you come back home after 31 days of that, and then you're faced with these people telling you who you are in such a shaming way. Did you have people when you came back who were rallying around you, who were speaking truth into you?
To be honest with you, I kind of had to refine that. Some, I would say a couple people that were just safe people and probably had always been safe people for me. But I did some pretty consistent work with my psychiatrist when I came back, and her helping me navigate the conversations that I need to have and those that I didn't. Like, what are the conversations that are healthy and are helpful, and what aren't? What are not going to change the outcome of something? And the hard part is, at the beginning, no one's ready to talk to you, or no one's ready to work through anything. They just need time. And so you do all this work and you come to a certain place, and then these other people who used to be a part of your life want to re-enter it. And okay, now they're ready. Now I want to talk about this. And you're like, how many times do I have to revisit this for you? When it was about you, but not really. And I remember my psychiatrist to ask me one time, she said, when does the shame parade end? And I'm like, that's what I'm asking you. When does it end? She goes, it ends when you tell it to end. The shame parade ends with you, when you decide that you're going to own it and grow and move forward, but not allow other people to continue to force you to revisit those things that you've dealt with, and things that even myself and Jen have dealt with, but they hadn't. And so that was really hard, to know which conversations and which ones to continue. And the bottom line is, everyone I spoke to in the professional world, in the psychiatric world and counseling world, would say they have to be people that feel safe. It can't be those that don't feel safe. Obviously, when it comes to family and your kids and your things like that, that's an open door forever for me. But I'm at a place now where I'm not going to just go back and explain myself to someone, especially when I can't explain it. I can't look back and say, let me make sense of what I was thinking. I can't. There's no answer I can give you that's going to make sense to you, that why I did what I did, because it doesn't make sense to me. All I can do is own what I did and go, oh my gosh, I just feel like an out of body experience.
Can I ask you a question about that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think it's really good how you said it, like what conversations to have and what conversations not to have. And I love the direction of, you have the conversation with people who are safe.
Right.
I also think when you're coming out of a shame trauma, I know from my experience and stuff, it feels like there's a lot of conversations that you want to have.
Yeah.
That even the person's not safe, but there's this part of you that still wants to have it. How would you kind of direct somebody in that, like how to know when you still don't have the conversation?
Yeah, and that's hard for me because I want to fix everything and I want to be good with everyone. It kills me. I hate it, thinking that someone has something against me.
Yeah. It's so hard.
Yeah. Especially those who I've been friends with for a long time or something like that. The direction I was given, and the thing that feels most comfortable for me, is if someone even, someone who maybe I was really close with wants to have that conversation, my first question is to myself, can this be a redemptive conversation? Like, what is the goal of this conversation? If all you want to do is vent, you should have written me a letter a year ago. If all you want to do is vent, and the goal of this is not for us to have a restored relationship or for there to be peace or for there to be something, if it's just for you, then this isn't going to happen, because my healing cannot be contingent upon how anyone else responds to what I say, right? It can't be, because I'm not in charge of how you respond to what I say. I'm not in charge of whether or not you believe me or my intentions or anything like that. And so I have to really be able to go into a conversation, just be going, I really believe what this is. And so in the same way, if you want to come to me and just vent or me explain myself to you or this or that, and your healing is to be contingent upon my response, I'm enabling you now. And that's your work. I can't do that work for you. And so I've literally had conversations where I would ask that, what is the goal of this conversation? Well, I just got to get some things off my chest. I'm sorry. I literally had a very, very close friend of mine that I have reached out to and apologized to and said many things towards him, that we were very close to getting back together to have a conversation. And in this conversation, he's led it before we had it with, I know we will never be friends again, but I just this. And I immediately at that moment go, if there's no possibility for like a restoration or redemption in this relationship, then this conversation is not going to be healthy. Why can this not be open-ended of let's see where this goes? And for me, that's it. If I feel like it could be redemptive or helpful for them or me, I'm open to it. But if it feels like just, I want you to revisit it, you need to apologize to me more, I need you to say something different or this or that, unless you're one of my kids, that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. I think that's so wise. I think another thing that I feel like I hear myself saying, I don't know if this is right or not, in sessions sometimes in this place is, if you're feeling that longing to connect there, and it kind of feels panicky almost, right? But and it's
right.
not going to be good, but you still have this, it's clear that your emotion brain is in control in that moment, and the logic side of your brain is probably shut down. But to ask yourself in those moments, like, is this that part of me that's still trying to redeem my guilty feeling?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And if it is, like,
Yeah.
I'm never going to get what I want from this
Right.
conversation. And
you don't
so,
have anything to prove to that person. And there are other people, right, that may call you haven't talked to forever, and you just go, oh, I know this is a safe conversation. I will take this call in a heartbeat. I will have this dinner, this coffee in a heartbeat. And it is amazing how obvious the difference is.
yeah.
It's if you listen to yourself, what you're saying right there, you actually know. I'm not saying that some conversations aren't worth, it's a lot of work, but that's the baseline. That's where I start.
Yeah, it is a lot of work, but and I just giving your true self the power to make that decision, and not that guilt-ridden self
Right.
power, right? I think.
Oh, you're going to open a can, start talking about our true self.
Like, oh yeah, like, oh, no. But I think that can kind of be a place of like, our body does kind of tell us in that moment, even if we can't put words on it, what part of us is really speaking there. So I love that. Gosh, I think there's so much for that. And so many people, we all have broken relationships, whether we have done something that's like a big T trauma to others, or just like, gosh, that friendship didn't make it. And every time I see them, I feel embarrassed or ashamed. I think your wisdom there is so huge for people, regardless of where they are in life.
Well, and there's two different sides of that too. You have this internal thing going on where it's kind of, it's a gut feeling, or it's something you can't put your finger on, but it brings you anxiety or things like that. So some of that is pretty hard, but then there are other things in our life, in between relationships, where they are so glaringly obvious. We've just never opened our eyes to actually see them. And you go, well, this really surprised me. I should have listened or thought, and you go, how did you not see that? I mean, it was so glaringly obvious. And so sometimes you got to look inside, and then sometimes you just got to look outside, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. I love that. I'd love to hear more about what your road has been like since getting back. I assumed it was daunting coming back from on site, but I didn't really ask you if it was. Like, what it was like when you first came back there and what it's like today. You said you're still working through some of these things and family and your relationships trying to continue to grow these skills.
Right.
Be, more natural. But what else?
Yeah. The first 2 months were a roller coaster because I didn't know yet how to apply what I was learning. And my environment that I came home to was so foreign to me and different than what what I left. Right. Jen and I had filed for divorce. Um, we, um, not many people that I knew were talking to me. I had been radio silent for over 6 weeks. I had been gone to on site and had moved in with my brother and sister for a couple of weeks prior to that. And so hadn't really talked to anybody. I just got talked to a lot. And so I came back feeling like, okay, this is my new world. I'm alone now and I'm starting over. And I had to sit in the consequences of the damage I had created and the pain I had caused and the relationships that I had broken. And so I had to somehow come back and try and hold healing in one hand and sit in the consequences of the destruction that I had caused in the other, because you don't get to just pretend like that's not there. Right. And so that was really hard for me, because that was the time that I was having to answer everybody's questions after I had just done 3.5 years of therapy in 31 days. You know what I mean? And so I was in a different place than everyone else. And I felt like I had to get into a time warp and jump right back into the shame. And it felt like it was almost undoing everything that I had gone through the last month. And so I dug my feet in and I overchose me, I think, and was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to live for me, and I'm going to do me, and I'm going to do my thing. And I kind of reverted a little bit back into where I was before I left. But here's what I found. Before, those things were exhilarating and they gave me kind of an endorphin rush, and it felt fulfilling and fun. And all of a sudden here, I saw it for what it really was. And it was just not fun. And it was just miserable. And it was a downward spiral. And it didn't take long for me to look at it and go, wow, that was just all lies. It wasn't real. It wasn't true. And so I took a little stint there where I think I caused more damage. And I had to experience something that I had seen with rose petaled glasses in the past, but now saw, bless you, Chuck.
Sorry.
And so this is just being honest. I wish I could tell you I came back and I was just rolling, but I wasn't. I had a little time there. And so I slipped back into a deep depression again. I was off any kind of antidepressants. I was on no meds. I didn't drink when I came back. I was going to AA just to be in that environment, to have that kind of supported. I was going to counseling regularly. But then I tanked again, and I had a really hard fall. And I felt when I felt the gravity of all the loss that I had caused, I went so low, I became suicidal.
Yeah.
And had a couple people surround me that probably saved my life.
Wow.
And I think something happened then, as I'm still processing. How do I do with the relationships? Where was I wrong? Where was I questioning? Am I not fighting enough for my marriage? And I'm going, well, gosh, I mean, I can't undo what I've done. And then if we could undo it, we're back to where we were, where we struggled for 3 years in our marriage. Am I supposed to be fighting for this now when we both feel like this isn't going to work? Do I fight for am I fighting for the wrong reasons, or would I not? All of these things started coming back as I was trying to undo things, and I was trying to recover things instead of move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then my psychiatrist helped a lot, processing things, being honest. Had a few friends come around me, and then something happened that was very releasing for me, in which Jen and I had some really honest and hard conversations and dialogues anyways, where we just both were able to say the truth is that for us there's no way back for connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a gift that she offered me, that honesty, that what we had been through, that we are just not going to be able to recover. And I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And but for us both to come to that place, it felt like a sense of closure that allowed me personally
Mm-hmm.
to start really healing,
Mm-hmm.
to come to grips with the consequences of what had happened and see myself for where we really were, and to be able to go, there's nothing I can do now except for move forward.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Well, it allows you to say, okay, there's so much responsibility I have taken and owned here, but you were in that dance of like, is this still fully my responsibility, or are we both
Right.
aiming that neither one of us can go back there, And so I think I talked about this in a couple of podcasts ago, but Matt, my husband, and I went to marriage therapy with this amazing, witty firecracker of a woman who was in her late 70s at the time, years ago. And she started the first session, didn't know us at all, and said, okay, we got to decide, is this marriage dead or alive? And if it's dead, I want y'all to know we can still bury it well.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being like, I got to get the hell out of here. Like, she wants, our marriage is already dead, but she talked, and I think it's so true, and I've seen it play out over and over again. Even if a marriage is dead, gosh, it makes such a big difference if you're intentional about burying it well.
Yeah.
Versus continuing to cause more trauma in that aftermath of it. And it's a moment where y'all both chose.
You grow up in an environment though where you're not allowed to do that. You're just supposed to fight to, no matter what, or God's going to throw a lightning bolt at you and hate you forever or whatever, that guilt of that environment. Sure, you should fight. You should fight and try as hard as you can before, but when you come to that place where you just know that there's just that there's zero connection, and there's all the things that make, I see people post on Facebook on their anniversaries. Hey, dear, it's our anniversary. We made it, 30 years. We don't really like each other or get along or do the same things, but we made it, and that's what's important, right? And I kind of sit back and go, no, I don't think that's what's important. I mean, it's a part of it, but I think you can be happy and you can have joy and you could be, good together. And so, but I just think, again, what we grow up in our environments, it shapes how we deal with things like this. Anyways, for me, that I think closure for anyone, and just accepting where things really are and being honest about where they really are. It's a gift to the other person to be honest about that as much as it is to yourself. Yeah. And that was incredibly, I don't know if the word releasing is right, but to come to that moment, I think was the thing that allowed me. I remember the first time just kind of leaving the house, because I spent a lot of time just here by myself, just kind of leaving the house and going and grabbing dinner, just kind of feeling like I'm really not responsible for anyone else's emotions right now. Like, I'm just responsible for mine. Wow. And, what I do right now, where I go, when I come home or whatever, I feel like, okay, this is like a new starting point for me. That was really unique. It was really interesting place for me, and at a critical moment. So anyways.
Yeah, that's huge. So you kind of think, so there was this, I actually think as well that it was good that you spiraled back a little bit, because I think there's something about that creates more trust with yourself. If you know, okay, I've messed up again, and I've got me in a way now that I couldn't before. and this isn't going to be something that I live in fear of,
Mm-hmm.
trying to outperform your way from ever being back in that place again. Or, I think it's a powerful thing when you can experience yourself failing again after a
Mm-hmm.
really big failure and knowing, wow, I've done the work I did really did matter because I'm doing this different this time.
Well, what was amazing for me was to look back on, you know, on going out and going crazy or being out of control or whatever, and looking at it and feeling foolish about it instead of thinking it was cool or fun, and just go, gosh, that's embarrassing, and then beginning to really see it for what it really is. That to me was a great encouragement because it's like, yeah, I'm like, the way I view this is different now. It's like, wow, I really think I've dealt with some things.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's really been some change in how I view this. And that was good. So I wish I didn't go through that few weeks, 3 weeks, however long it was at that time, but it was a necessary part, I think, of the journey, for sure, for me.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was after those experiences that I first met Tina and was ready to sit down with someone for the first time, because I'm not trying to date. I'm not trying to impress anybody or whatever. It was an interesting scenario where I ended up meeting her with some friends and we were just talking, and she just started asking me every question in the book. And I mean, like literally in the first 30 minutes of sitting there talking to her, she knew everything about me and all the bad things, because she just like knew how to ask all the questions, that I don't know would expose a person. And I had absolutely no desire to tell anything but the truth, because I was like, this is what it was. It is what it is. You like it or don't. And so that was it prepared me for that first conversation, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. And how cool to have that experience of her knowing all that within the first 30 minutes.
Right.
And you to feel free in yourself, but also it sounds like you received freedom from her in that too.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't expect to ever talk to her again after that day. And instead she was like, yeah, I understand. I'm like, what? Yeah, that must have been hard, and you still, you hear this and it's, it was pretty refreshing, and encouraging. So,
yeah.
Can I switch gears for a sec?
Mhm.
I don't want to cut you off. Hey, Brandon. So this is an interesting topic on my heart, and I'm interested to hear your perspective, because I think you've really got a good one at this point. But how have you, or are you, reconciling your faith, given that you were in such a path, obviously very successful and strong leader, but as I understand the story, some of your peers and colleagues, have since, I guess, turned the back on you or something like that, if that's the right way to say it. Where are you now?
right.
And how do you reconcile, or have you, or are you in the process of?
Yeah, and let me clarify one thing. I don't know that some of my peers or colleagues have turned their back on me. I have one friend, Jason Morris, a good friend of mine, who actually currently pastors a church that I started, that regularly checks in and we hang out. And he's
That's
always
awesome.
been a very, very, open voice to me and safe person to speak to. But I think my faith journey is kind of just it. The one thing I'm grateful for, I've never questioned the existence of God. Like I've always thought it's odd if someone says, I don't like what happened there, so God can't be real. It's like, well, maybe you disagree with them, but how can you be mad at him or not want to believe him because you didn't like what he did? It sounds like you're countering your own argument, and so I may not have understood and, I still don't understand fully, all of these experiences, things I went to, but I've never questioned the existence of God or my faith in Christ. I've questioned how it all works sometimes, and I realized I didn't know as much as I thought I knew. And it's easy to be hopeful when everything is going well. Um, um, the bigger part, I think, is the being on a public platform in social media and things like that, is the church at large. Like my church was amazing, the people that I was around, but the people at large makes you really wonder and get disappointed. And wow, this is how you're going to respond. Not just, you can do the right thing the wrong way. I think there's some of them are doing the wrong thing the wrong way, but even if you're right, you can do it the wrong way. And the high percentage of that is just ridiculous. But I've also kind of come to grips with, it's just usually the angry people and the mean people are the ones you hear. And there's a lot of people out there that aren't mean and angry. And, it's just, the complainers you hear more of. So
Sure.
I think just time and perspective has given me a lot more understanding there. But then also I'm beginning to see God's grace again in my life. And, in my relationship with my kids, the things that are restored, a good career, the things that I can be grateful for.
Yeah.
I believe, I've always taught this about God's will. I do believe God has a perfect will. I think that we rarely see it because we live in a fallen world. And I don't know exactly what his perfect will looks like. I think there's his permissive will, where sometimes we go ahead and do whatever we want to, and he just kind of allows us to do that. And I think sometimes that's when we get in trouble or we learn our lessons, kind of like a parent's like, okay, go ahead, try. We'll see what happens, But I really believe in his redemptive will. I think that in the worst moments, at our very worst in our lives, the most terrible things that happen, that I do believe that in God's redemptive will, he can bring good and that he can restore things. And when you begin to see things around you that are good, and you don't just think you're lucky and you recognize maybe God did that, it starts changing your heart again and starts bringing you back to the appreciation for who he is and what he's doing. And when you start recognizing, wow, I needed that at that exact time and it showed up. And that happens in times where you do not deserve it over and over. Your faith starts reconciling itself, if that makes sense. And honestly, I think I'll go back to my fiance, Jatina. When we first met, we both looked at each other, and she had come out of a tough long-term relationship, and I had, and we really were kind of meeting each other in similar points in our lives. And a lot of people would say, don't do it, it's unhealthy, not going to work, those kinds of things. But there was just such a good connection, on an emotional level and conversational level and understanding and trust and all the things that I learned at milestones you need to heal. And we came to a point, after just spending time talking together, just being around for a few weeks, where I remember her saying, everybody thinks this is too soon. And she goes, but here's my fear. I think that if we wait, that you're going to find someone else and I'm going to find someone else and we won't have each other. Mm-hmm. And it was profound because I believed that, and so we went ahead and we took a shot, and we continued to date. And, I think in mid-December, we were just like, I think we're boyfriend, girlfriend. I think this is really, something we're doing. But to be honest with you, that's where I kind of felt like I was always doing something wrong, like because other people didn't approve of it or things like that. And I always kind of felt like I'm in trouble, if I care about this person and things like that. And when my relationship with her really, I think where we really connected is when we finally acknowledged maybe God just actually brought us together. Like maybe we're a gift to each other. And when I look at how healthy our relationship has been and how much, people throw away, hey, that person saved me or whatever. I don't think, first of all, I don't think anyone is saved or healed in isolation by themselves. Somebody, a brother, a friend, a parent, a mentor, somebody came around them to help them, right? But she really did help save me from myself at a time where I just didn't have that sense of community around me. And so there was a really strong connection there that when I'm telling you, when I started acknowledging it, instead of feeling like maybe God was mad at me for dating someone, that possibly it was a gift for part of my new journey or story, that it might actually be of him, you wouldn't believe the freedom that came into that relationship and into my life again. So I'm very grateful for that. And that's kind of where I'm at in my faith journey right now. I have not been back to church per se. We keep joking, we need to go to church this Sunday. I don't know where I would go. But I think faith is obviously way bigger than any individual church. There's definitely a role of church in a believer's life, but my faith is being reconciled, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm feeling a drawn towards seeing God moving in different areas in my life again, like I haven't seen in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
I think that's such, again, you're bringing such truth and authenticity to it that I could go off on that. But I think it's important to recognize maybe in this space that a lot of times, and not intentionally or, in bad intentions, right? But that when we have a really painful experience with church, we attribute that to our faith in God.
Right.
And I think it makes sense that we do that, without the intention of it. I don't think it's like an immature thing. I think it's just
Well, it's very linked to something very important to us, and it is supposed to be
right.
pure and right and good. So when it's not, it seems so wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, and a lot of times I think too, particularly in Texas and Tennessee, the culture is so much the religion aspect of Christianity that it seems like I think it's easy to go to church and be in that community and to that feel like that's what your faith is
Right.
all without really ever getting to have the personal faith that you're speaking of. And so when that place fails you, that's all you've ever really had maybe. And so I think it's so powerful for you to speak about that because it really reminds us how much bigger faith is than a culture. And how much bigger faith is than a church.
Right.
And how important it is to know people's failings and, to normalize that so that we don't, automatically link that to God.
Well, and then also understand that we have very finite minds and how we understand how God works. And it's an infinite God. We see a day as a day. And, scripture is very clear that to God, what is it? A day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years a day. I mean, I think about some of the hardest things for me in my faith at the beginning was because I just really committed so much of my life towards that, and had a couple experiences that were just super painful as I felt like I was following God's leading. One of them happened when we left a mega church in Austin and went to go start a simple church to just do what we felt like we were. I mean, it was brutal. The pastor there just ate us up like we were trying to, ruin his life for some reason. It was just really brutal. It was hard. And so it's hard not to go, man, we're trying to do good, and yet we're getting punished for it, right? And so even as we began to fight for the LGBTQ community, and you feel this backlash, it's hard not to just go, oh my goodness, how could you lead us into this and this going? But now I look back on that, and I wouldn't trade that for $1 million. I wouldn't trade it for the world, because it was right. And because we stood up for people, because it was right. And I'd do it again. I would completely, in a million years, I'd have done it a couple months later, but it was right. And it was supposed to happen. And so to be angry with how all that went down, when you have to ultimately go back and go, no, that's exactly what was supposed to happen. And then you can't control how other people respond. They're other people with their own issues and their own undiagnosed trauma and all kinds of things, so perspective and time definitely heals as you grow and learn and really think about what you value, and you go back and you go, yeah, that was really hard, but I'm just still so glad that happened.
Gosh, I feel like I want to keep talking, but I feel like that's a great place to end. It's just, I'm glad it happened, even with how hard.
Thanks for sharing, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Of course. Sheesh. I appreciate you guys.
I really hope that you keep talking on whatever format that happens. I'm grateful that you talked the way that you did through your Instagram handle, and that I got to be impacted by that through that connection. And the word truth just keeps coming back. There's something about you. There's a lot of great speakers out there. There's a lot of people on social media platforms that are very charismatic. But when somebody comes at you with just honest truth, it sits so different. And so many of us need it. So I don't know how that's going to play out in you, but I really hope that you don't inhibit yourself and the rest of us from hearing more about it.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I always try and be an encouragement wherever I can. When you stop listening to the voices that say that you're not worthy to share things, and so
Yeah.
grateful for that. I want to look forward and I want to move forward and I want to find my place and continue to do that. But I'm very happy and very content in life right now. I'm grateful for a great career and an amazing fiance who thinks I'm funny. And just enjoy. Yeah, it is. I mean, especially when you think you're funny. If the person you're with doesn't agree, that's a problem. So, but I hope we can all just be grateful for what we have in front of us and not take it for granted. That's a big part of it all. So thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know yesterday we were batting around 2 or 3 different topics we'd love to have you back on for. So I don't know if you'll be up for it, but we might reach back out.
Well,
So
just let me know. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Most likely. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
No, thank you so much. All right.
Brandon, you're awesome. I'm going to sign off.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to
Thanks,
meet
buddy.
you. All right.
Have a
Y'all have a
great
good
day.
one. Bye-bye.
As a therapist, I found it is sadly unusual to have a medical provider who is empathetic, knowledgeable, unhurried, and above all else, relentlessly devoted to getting you better. In fact, I never saw it until Dr. Michelle Cochran. Whether it's through genetic testing, an extremely thorough eval, TMS, or nasal esketamine, she finds a way. Being in network with most major insurance companies and now with 3 locations across Middle Tennessee, Dr. Cochran and her team at the Neuroscience and TMS Treatment Center have only multiplied their level of care. Go to our website, healingcenters.co, to learn more or schedule an appointment today.
From our studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Healing Centers, a podcast where we talk to experts and leaders in wellness, mental health, physiology, fitness, nutrition, and any other topic that helps us get through the day with purpose and through our life with long-term success and health. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to your podcast. Visit our website at www.healingcenters.co to share feedback, suggest future episode topics, and find out more about the people on our podcast.